My brother's smug voice sliced through the gentle clinking of glasses at our Easter dinner table like a blade through soft fruit. Not everyone can handle a real career in tech, he declared, his tone dripping with practiced condescension. His gaze locked squarely on me, daring me to flinch, daring me to defend myself in front of the family who, year after year, made it clear where I ranked. Nods circled the table, chuckles muffled behind napkins, and I felt the familiar heat crawl up my neck, the stifling weight of being the designated family disappointment pressing down on my chest. Then came silence, sharp, heavy, almost theatrical, until the sound of silverware resting against porcelain broke it. My 83-year-old grandmother, her back still straight, her eyes as sharp as ever, set down her fork with deliberate grace. With one question, I knew she could dismantle his carefully polished image, strip away the sheen of arrogance he wore like armor, and do it in front of everyone. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or dismissed by your own family, you know the ache of that moment. Strangers online sometimes validate us in ways our blood never does. That's why I say this. Your story deserves to be heard. Mark and I had always been cast into roles. He was the golden child, the polished tech success with the traditional credentials, computer science degree, Silicon Valley address, climbing the corporate ladder rung by rung like it was built just for him. I was the one who carved a jagged, unglamorous path. I learned by doing, by failing, by staying up past midnight coding after grueling retail shifts. My education came not from ivy-covered halls but from persistence, from breaking things and fixing them, from refusing to quit even when I was told I should. Not exactly cocktail party fodder, at least not in my family. At every gathering, the script was the same. Mark was paraded as the prodigy. My business was treated as a hobby, a cute little project, destined to collapse any day. Mom would pat my hand and ask, "Still doing that computer thing?" while practically glowing when announcing Mark's latest promotion. Easter had always been the family's unofficial quarterly status update. Mom's glazed ham perfumed the dining room, its sweetness mixing with the lilies arranged on the table. Dad's signature cocktails, bourbon with orange bitters, always in heavy crystal, clinked as people settled into their seats, preparing for the inevitable questions. "So, how's work going?" When it was Mark's turn, he straightened his designer collar and launched into his monologue. The chandelier light caught his expensive watch as he gestured, his voice rolling with corporate jargon meant to impress, to remind us all that he belonged to a higher world. "The tech industry is brutal these days," he said, swirling his wine like an expert. "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. You need formal education, connections, and frankly, a certain mindset." His eyes flicked toward me with that look, the one that said, "We both know you're playing dress up in my arena." My fork dug into a honey-glazed carrot with too much force, the sweetness turning bitter on my tongue. Aunt Debbie, forever the peacemaker, tried to bridge the gap. "Sophia does computer work too, right?" she asked brightly. Mark chuckled. That sound. Sharp, dismissive, humiliating. Sophia's little project is more like digital arts and crafts compared to enterprise development. The air grew thick. Silverware scraped faintly against china, eyes dropped to plates, everyone retreating into their asparagus to avoid the tension. It wasn't the first time. At Thanksgiving, Mark had told our cousins my business model was unsustainable. I'd sat quietly, choking on pumpkin pie that tasted like ashes while his words turned me into the fool in their eyes. Now, as the ham glistened under the lights, Mark pressed on. "Real tech means transforming industries, not making little apps. That's why degrees from places like Stanford matter." Uncle Rob nodded, balding head catching the chandelier glow. "That's why Mark drives a Tesla and buys those fancy wines. The big leagues pay differently." My cheeks burned, the color of the cranberry sauce beside me. 8 years of grinding, 8 years of sleepless nights and risks they couldn't imagine, reduced to little apps. When Mom asked about my recent business trip to Tokyo, Mark cut in smoothly before I could answer. "Sophia's more on the administrative side. She manages freelancers who do the actual coding." The napkin in my lap crumpled under my clenched fist. I'd written every line of code in our core software myself, my fingers aching from debugging until 4 a.m. more nights than I could count. But I swallowed the protest. I'd long learned that correcting him only made me look defensive, while he, with his smooth voice and perfect timing, always came out as the gracious expert. By dessert, Mom's lemon meringue pie, golden and perfect, sat on the table while Mark advised our teenage cousin about how to really get into tech. Start with fundamentals, then a top program. Not everyone has what it takes. Our parents beamed, pride radiating off them as if Mark's success reflected on them like light from a polished mirror. Their glances at me carried that mix of pity and dismissal. Dad poured Mark's wine first. Always first. No one else at that table knew what Grandma knew, that my little project had just completed its biggest move yet. 6 months of negotiations, confidential meetings, numbers checked and rechecked, and on Friday, I'd sign the papers. My company had acquired Tech Fusion's struggling enterprise division. Yes, the very division where my brother worked, the one he bragged about like it was untouchable. I could still feel the weight of the pen in my hand, the gravity of the moment as my signature sealed the deal. Only Grandma had celebrated with me, her cinnamon tea steaming between us as she role-played my toughest negotiations. The night before Easter, we toasted privately with champagne, the bubbles fizzing as she raised her glass. To knowing your worth, she said, eyes sparkling, even when others don't see it yet. At dinner, I caught her glancing at her vintage wristwatch, her grandfather's old piece she never removed. Its faint ticking seemed to keep time with my pulse. She checked it again, eyes twinkling each time they met mine. Mark, she interrupted suddenly, slicing through his explanation of blockchain to Dad, whose eyes had glazed over long before. Which division of Tech Fusion did you say you worked in again? Enterprise Solutions, he replied with pride, his chest puffing slightly. We're the backbone of the company's revenue. Grandma nodded, lifting her water glass. Her hand trembled faintly with age, but her gaze was sharp enough to cut steel. Fascinating. And how's morale there lately? I read something about restructuring. A tiny hitch in his confidence flickered, just enough for me to catch it. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Just rumors. Nothing official. We're too valuable to touch. Interesting, Grandma murmured, her eyes flicking to her watch again, her lips curving in the faintest smile. Grandma, Mark laughed, dismissive as ever. Sophia's company is in a completely different space. She wouldn't know anything about enterprise-level operations. I sipped my water, the ice clinking loud in my ears as I tried to hide the smile threatening to escape. Mom's chocolate mousse arrived, rich and glossy in crystal cups. Grandma caught my eye, raised one perfectly penciled eyebrow, and the grandfather clock in the hallway began its low chime. 6 o'clock. The embargo had just lifted. The world now knew what only she and I had carried in secret. The mousse melted sweet on my tongue, but nothing compared to the taste of anticipation. After years of being brushed aside, of enduring patronizing pats on the head and the same tired responses of, "That's nice, dear," whenever I mentioned a business milestone, the air was about to shift in a way I had never dared to imagine. Grandma, who rarely raised her voice but always commanded attention, set down her dessert spoon with deliberate care. The faint clink against fine china rang out sharper than it should have, as if the entire dining room had fallen silent just to hear it. She tilted her head slightly and with a kind of calm precision that could slice through armor asked, "Mark, you mentioned not everyone can handle a real career in tech. I'm curious what you mean by that." Mark, who had clearly been rehearsing the speech in his head for years, launched into it with the confidence of a man who never doubted himself. He spoke about education, about corporate pedigree, about the kind of technical expertise only a select few could hope to achieve. His dessert spoon punctuated his words, slicing through the air as chocolate mousse threatened to leap off its edge with each grand gesture. Grandma didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. "So tell me, Mark," she pressed, "success in tech is measured by what exactly?" Mark, eager to prove himself, answered smoothly, "Stock options, acquisition potential, valuation, all of the above. It's about building something valuable enough that the major players want to acquire you, or about being at those major players making the decisions yourself." He smiled, convinced he had summed up the game better than anyone else could. Grandma's lips curved into the faintest of smiles as she turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes glittered with something that looked suspiciously like mischief. "Sophia," she said lightly, "is that why your company just bought his?" The sound of a spoon clattering against porcelain cut through the stunned silence. Uncle Rob's mouth fell open, a streak of chocolate smudging his front tooth, frozen mid-chew. "What?" Mark's voice cracked as he whipped out his phone, his hands trembling as he scrolled furiously. The bluish glow of the screen made his complexion seem suddenly ghostly. I cleared my throat, aware of every gaze drilling into me. SupplyStream finalized the acquisition of TechFusion's Enterprise Solutions division on Friday, I said evenly, my voice steadier than I felt. The press release went live tonight at 6. That's my division, Mark stammered, staring at the screen where my face and name were printed above the TechCrunch headline. Yes, I replied softly, though the steadiness of my tone surprised even me. Effective tomorrow morning, your team will report to my VP of Operations. Performance reviews have already been underway. Mom froze. Her wine glass halted halfway to her lips. The crimson liquid trembled dangerously close to spilling over the rim. You bought Mark's company? The underperforming division, I corrected calmly. We're retaining the engineering talent, but restructuring the leadership. Uncle Rob nearly choked on his pie, coughing as the realization struck him. Wait. Mark now works for Sophia? The dining room erupted in a flurry of overlapping questions, voices colliding in a chaotic symphony like digital traffic lights all flashing green at once. Dad's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally something deeper, something like pride. How big is your company? Aunt Debbie asked, her voice pitched higher than usual. When did this happen? Mom demanded, glancing between Mark and me as though she were watching a tennis match. What exactly does SupplyStream do? Dad asked at last, genuinely curious for the first time. Mark sat motionless, his phone glowing with the unmistakable evidence, our company logos paired together on the screen. I told them how my little project had grown to 230 employees spanning 3 countries, how our supply chain software was trusted by 6 Fortune 500 companies, how our last funding round had pushed our valuation to $500 million. But you never talk about this, Mom whispered, her voice fragile, her wine glass now resting firmly on the table. I tried, I said simply. For years. Dinner carried on in a blur of stunned questions and halting conversation, relatives now scrambling to understand the scope of what I had built, the scope of what they had ignored. All the while, Grandma sat back with her teacup, sipping serenely, her expression that of a cat who had just devoured a bowl of cream. Mark excused himself early, muttering about needing to prepare for tomorrow, his Tesla fishtailing out of the gravel driveway with none of his usual composure. The sound of tires faded quickly into the cool night air. As I helped clear the table, Dad pulled me aside. Plates balanced in his hands, his eyes glistened behind his glasses. I never understood your business, he admitted, his voice unsteady. I'm sorry we didn't give you the same support we gave Mark. The plates in my hands clinked as I set them down. It's okay, Dad. Not everyone gets what I do. That's why I stopped trying to explain it. No, he said firmly, placing his hand on my shoulder. It's not okay. We should have tried harder. I should have tried harder. Later, driving home with the rhythm of streetlights casting long staccato shadows across the dashboard, I realized something I hadn't before. I no longer needed their validation. The success itself was louder than any approval they could give. The weight I'd carried, proving myself worthy of their attention, their respect, lifted mile by mile. By Monday morning, the warm scent of fresh coffee filled my corner office as sunlight spilled across floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Mark was already waiting, stiff in one of the leather chairs across from my desk, his perfectly styled hair slightly undone. He rose as I entered. I had no idea, he said softly, his confidence stripped away. All this time I thought you were just playing at tech? I finished for him, placing my bag on the desk beside my jade plant, the same one Grandma had given me when I signed my first big client. Mark nodded, eyes flicking around the office, larger and better than his had ever been, the building itself carrying my company's name. The funny thing about real success, Mark, I said gently, is that it doesn't need constant announcement. He winced, recognizing his own words turned back at him. So, what happens now? He asked, fingers fiddling nervously with the flashy watch he'd paraded at dinner. That depends on you, I replied. Your technical skills are strong. Your management style needs work. The question is whether you can adapt. For the first time in our adult lives, Mark really looked at me. Not as his little sister, not as someone to dismiss, but as an equal. Maybe even as someone he could learn from. The truth is, the people who underestimate us most often are the ones closest to us, the very people who should have believed first. It's a unique kind of pain, but it can forge a unique kind of determination. If you've ever had to prove your worth to those who doubted you, know this: you are not alone. There's a whole community of us who've built in the shadows, who know the sweetness of creating something undeniable. Because real victory isn't in the moment of vindication, though that moment is sweet. It's in building something that matters, something that lasts. In the months since that Easter dinner, Mark and I have been finding new footing. First as colleagues, then slowly as siblings again. He's learning to listen more than he speaks. I'm learning to raise my voice more often. And Grandma, well, she just smiles that knowing smile, the one that says she saw it all along, the one that reminds me that sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you until the world finally catches up. Next week, I'll share how Mark and I navigated our new professional relationship, and the unexpected ways it began to heal the personal one. Because sometimes the most profound transformations arrive when we least expect them. Over Easter dinner, with lemon meringue pie still sweet on our tongues.